Hi, welcome to another episode of U.S. History with Lennox, and today we are looking at the presidency of John F. Kennedy. Now, Kennedy was the 35th president of the United States and is one of the most celebrated and idolized figures in our American history. He was the youngest person ever elected president, and he will charm the nation with his charisma and good looks. He's going to usher us into the 1960s, a very tumultuous time in our history. And he is going to call for activism and social change. He's going to inspire an entire generation of young people, encouraging them to participate in a civic life, engage with the world, and fight for equality. Though his presidency is not going to yield a whole lot of political accomplishment, in fact, there's going to be a lot of mistakes that will be made, his legacy remains. By issuing this mandate for public service, he is going to inspire the nation to take on challenges that will lead to major political, social, and cultural changes. So, let's get into the Kennedy administration.
We discussed tonight domestic issues, but I would not want that to be any implication to be given that this does not involve directly our struggle with Mr. Khrushchev for survival. Mr. Khrushchev is in New York, and he maintains the communist offensive throughout the world because of the productive power of the Soviet Union itself. The Chinese communists have always had a large population, but they are important and dangerous now because they are mounting a major effort within their own country.
There is no question but that we cannot discuss our internal affairs in the United States without recognizing that they have a tremendous bearing on our international position. There is no question but that this nation cannot stand still because we are in a deadly competition, a competition not only with the men in the Kremlin, but the men in Peking. We're ahead in this competition, as Senator Kennedy, I think, has implied. But when you're in a race, the only way to stay ahead is to move ahead.
What you just saw were clips from the very first televised presidential debate between Democratic nominee John F. Kennedy and Vice President and Republican nominee Richard Nixon. Now, this is a tale of two debates. There were two clear winners in this debate, depending on who you asked. Those who watched it on TV said, oh my gosh, JFK won hands down. I mean, he looked good, young, and vibrant. Nixon, on the other hand, wasn't prepared for the effect that television would have on his campaign. He was seen as tired, had a 5 o'clock shadow. Several shots showed him sweating, and it looked like he was not prepared to be the president. But that was those who watched it on television. Those who heard the debate on radio, they had no doubt that Nixon won this debate. Well, what came out of all of this very first debate between these two men, was a whole new system of campaigning in the United States, where television is going to become the center of everything. Kennedy is going to go on to win this election, although it's going to be the closest election in presidential history. Kennedy wins the popular vote by only about 120,000 votes. Kennedy is going to go on to win this election, although it will be the closest presidential election in history. He only won the popular vote by about 120,000. And as he goes into his first inaugural address in January of 1961, he has the task to inspire a nation that has been caught in a Cold War for over 13 years. And he's going to do that with his speech.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man.
He's going to inspire people with his optimism, with his youthfulness, and with the way that he handles the media going forward. It didn't hurt that Americans idolized his family. They referred to the White House as Camelot, and he was a very popular president. He put forth the image of hope for most Americans. They saw the White House family as the picture of potential, the young, beautiful wife, the 2 children, and there was a promise that they saw in their future. This was a symbol of hope for everyone. He also had a very close circle of advisors. In fact, his brother, Robert Bobby Kennedy, is going to be tapped to be the Attorney General. And it wasn't uncommon that wherever JFK was, there was Bobby Kennedy right by his side. He'll introduce a new domestic policy for America called the New Frontier. The New Frontier had goals that included increasing federal aid to education, providing health insurance for the elderly, and creating a Department of Urban Development. But he's also going to go beyond the borders of the United States with some of his policies. The Peace Corps is going to be created as one of his first official acts as president. And the goal of the Peace Corps was to send American volunteers out to serve in underdeveloped countries, where they would help with education and farming and construction and healthcare, taking the American dream beyond the borders and the shores of the United States. Yet while we're taking the lead in the world with these type of policies, we are falling behind in another race, a race with the Soviets that started in the 1950s. In 1957, the Soviets are going to shock the world and the United States when they launched the very first satellite into space, Sputnik. And we realized that we were technologically behind the Soviets. It is at this point that Eisenhower is going to sign into law the National Defense of Education Act, his own attempt to put money into education, focused on math and science. They're also going to create NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, to start focusing in on this space race with the Soviets. Our very first astronauts are going to be tapped. It's called the Mercury Program, and men such as Alan Shepard and John Glenn will be the face of NASA to all of our country and the world. We continued to challenge our scientists to catch up with the Soviets, and we were almost there when in April of 1961, Yuri Gagarin is going to be the very first man to go into space, a Soviet cosmonaut. We were just so close because 1 month later, an American astronaut, Alan Shepard, will be the first American to go into space. We're slowly catching up, I guess. In September of 1963, Kennedy is going to challenge our scientists in a speech that he gives at Rice University, where he says, "We choose to go to the moon," challenging NASA and everyone involved to be the first to get a man to walk on the moon. And you know what? His challenge was met July 20th, 1969, when Neil Armstrong will be the first human to step foot on the surface of the moon. But it wasn't just the space race that we were competing with the Soviets on. We're still embroiled in the Cold War, and there's going to be a lot of challenges that Kennedy is going to have to face during his administration. The first is going to be with the building of the Berlin Wall in 1961. The Soviets were struggling with keeping East Germans in Berlin, and they wanted to stop them from escaping to West Berlin and to freedom. And so in 1961, they're going to construct a wall that circled Berlin where no one could get in or could get out. The Berlin Wall is going to become a symbol of the oppression of communism around the world. Kennedy is going to make a speech at the Berlin Wall, just on the other side where East Berliners could hear his voice when he said that we are here for you, we have not forgotten you, and we will continue to fight for you. But it wasn't just over near the Soviet Union that there was problems. There was problems right here at home. In 1959, Fidel Castro is going to overthrow the Cuban dictator Batista. Now, before I go any further, I want you to think back. 1898, the Spanish-American War, the Treaty of Paris, the Platt Amendment. America had set up this protectorate role over Cuba, where the Platt Amendment guided us in everything that was going on that island. We had a lot of American economic investments and businesses stationed in Cuba. Well, when Castro takes control, he is going to nationalize all American businesses and properties. When Castro doesn't back down, Eisenhower is going to approve an embargo on sugar, oil, and guns. We cut off trade with Cuba. In response, Castro turns to the Soviet Union for economic help, and Cuba will officially turn into a communist state. Now, towards the end of his presidency, Eisenhower is going to start training anti-communist Cuban exiles with the goal of them going back and retaking their island. However, before he left the president, he decided to push back the attack, leaving it to his successor to take the mantle and decide what to do. I'm sure Eisenhower thought it would be Nixon, but it's going to be Kennedy. This is going to lead us to the Bay of Pigs debacle. Kennedy is going to go forward with the plan, and he will sign off on an attack on the island of Cuba. The CIA-trained Cuban exiles will try to attack the island and overthrow Castro. What ends up happening instead is the invasion was an absolute disaster and a huge foreign policy blunder for Kennedy. This is not the look he wanted when he first took office. The exiles were captured by the Cubans and put into prison. After the Bay of Pigs disaster, we discovered that the Soviets were building missile bases in Cuba. Now, they claimed they were doing it as a response to the fact that the United States had missile bases in Turkey. But regardless, this was a massive threat to American security because any Soviet missile on the island of Cuba could reach any part of the United States. During this crisis, we came closer than ever to nuclear war with the Soviets. As a response, the United States placed a naval quarantine around Cuba, a blockade, if you will, that would stop incoming shipments coming from the Soviet Union. And we ended up with a standoff there in the Atlantic Ocean. Naval ships seeing Soviet ships approaching them, not knowing what their response is going to be. The United States raised their security level to DEFCON 3. Basically, the lower the number of DEFCON, the bigger the threat. DEFCON 3 is about middle of the road. As the Soviet ships reach the quarantine line, they will receive a radio order from Moscow to hold their position. So basically, we have American and Soviet naval warships staring each other down, waiting for word from leadership. Kennedy is going to take a risk. He's going to threaten that the United States will invade Cuba unless the Soviet missiles are removed from the island. At the same time, America goes to DEFCON 2. That means soldiers are preparing for war at any minute. The Russians offer a solution when they say they will remove their missiles if the United States removed their missiles from Turkey. Crisis averted. But it was a scary 13 days in American history. JFK is not going to live to see the end of his first administration. On November 22nd, 1963, Kennedy and his wife are going to be in Dallas, Texas, where he is planning to announce his re-election campaign. As the motorcade went through downtown Dallas, JFK will be shot in the head by Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald is going to be captured right away, but he himself is going to end up being assassinated by Jack Ruby on his way to trial. Upon the death of JFK, Lyndon B Johnson, his vice president, will be sworn in as the new president of the United States. This picture in the background was from Air Force One, where LBJ was sworn into office. Jackie Kennedy made a point to be there in that picture. She believed that that would show the American people that we had to go on. But there were some big issues that LBJ is going to have to face as president. Number one, the civil rights movement is really starting to grow. And number two, poverty is growing as well in our country. So in our next video, we'll look at how LBJ handles these problems and more. That's it. The Kennedy administration. Hopefully you learned a little something about the man, and if so, go ahead and give me a like. If you missed something, you know you can always go back and watch it again. And as usual, feel free to subscribe. You know it just makes my day when I see that number goes up. Other than that, I do thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.